The Arzok scout ship sliced through Earth's upper atmosphere, its hull gleaming against the friction of entry. Inside, Commander Zalvok leaned forward in his seat, mandibles clicking in amusement as he reviewed the intelligence gathered on the planet below. The holographic display flickered, showcasing primitive battle formations, outdated projectile-based weaponry, and a reliance on terrain for cover. He scoffed. Pathetic, he muttered, his secondary arms folding across his chest. His second-in-command, Bralven, let out a guttural chuckle. They hide in trees. They call it guerrilla warfare. Cowards. The rest of the squad, 6 elite Arzok operatives, shared in the mirth. Their species had conquered worlds through sheer force, crushing opposition beneath superior weaponry and unrelenting assaults. The notion of using forests and shadows to wage war was beneath them. Battle was meant to be met head-on, with honor, not lurking like prey. Their ship pierced through a bank of dense clouds, revealing a vast emerald expanse stretching endlessly beneath them. The target zone, an ancient forest largely untouched by human expansion. Intelligence suggested the area was used for military training, but the Arzok saw no indication of armored divisions or heavy artillery. Just trees. They would land, gather data, and prove humanity's inferiority before the inevitable conquest. The landing was seamless. A hiss of hydraulics vented as the ramp extended, and the squad disembarked onto the forest floor. Towering trees loomed above, their canopies thick enough to block much of the daylight. The air was thick with humidity, alive with the quiet hum of unseen creatures. Even the ground felt different, soft, covered in layers of organic decay. Zalvok wrinkled his snout in distaste. "Activate scanners," he ordered. Bralven tapped the device on his gauntlet. A pulse of red light swept through the underbrush, but the readings showed only small animal life. Nothing significant. No soldiers, no threats. He snorted. As expected. They train in this? It's a child's hunting ground. Zalvok took a step forward, his heavy footfalls muffled by the loam. He gestured for the squad to fan out, weapons at the ready. The mission was simple. Gather tactical assessments, analyze potential resistance, and return to their warship with evidence that humanity's best warriors were no match for the Arzok. They moved efficiently, weaving between the trees with well-practiced discipline. Their armor, though formidable, felt cumbersome in this environment. Low-hanging branches snagged against plating, and the uneven terrain made movement less fluid than they were accustomed to. Zalvok frowned. The humans had chosen this location deliberately. A flicker of motion in the treetops made Bralven pause. He glanced up, mandibles tightening. Nothing, just wind rustling the leaves. Yet an instinct, an old hunter's intuition, left a whisper of unease in his mind. He shook it off. "No sign of resistance," he reported. "We should push deeper." Zalvok nodded, but the amusement from earlier had faded. Something felt off. The silence was too complete. The ambient noise of small creatures and insects was present, but there was an absence of larger disturbances. No birds startled at their approach. No distant movement. It was as if the forest itself was holding its breath. The squad pressed on, their scanners periodically sweeping for heat signatures. The deeper they ventured, the more suffocating the forest seemed to become. Towering roots twisted like grasping fingers, and thick vines draped over branches like the remnants of old snares. It was an alien terrain, one that did not conform to their expectations of battlefields. Another movement, this time. Zalvok saw it too. A shifting shadow. High in the canopy, he halted, holding up a fist. The squad froze, weapons trained in all directions. "Report," he growled. Bralven swept his scanner over the area. Nothing. He narrowed his eyes. "We are being watched," Zalvok said, his voice a low rumble. Bralven exhaled sharply through his snout. "Let them watch. What can they do against us?" A rustling above. Faint. Calculated. Something was there. Zalvok's grip tightened on his weapon. It wasn't fear that stirred in his chest. It was irritation. The humans were playing at ghosts, as if their mere presence could unsettle the Arzak. It was a foolish notion. He was done entertaining it. "Switch to thermal," he ordered. The squad obeyed, activating the alternate vision mode in their helmets. The world shifted into a palette of reds and oranges, the warmth of the forest creatures standing out as faint glows. They scanned the trees, sweeping methodically. Nothing. Zalvok frowned. That was impossible. Then the first device failed. A warning icon flashed across Bralven's visor. His scanner flickered, the data stream cutting in and out. Another operative muttered a curse. His targeting reticle was misaligning, blinking erratically. One by one, their technology began to glitch. Interference. Bralven hissed. Zalvok's mandibles clicked in irritation. Impossible. This planet lacks the capability to... A branch creaked. Not from the wind. Not from an animal. A deliberate shift of weight. Zalvok raised his weapon, aiming at the sound. His squad followed suit, fanning out into a defensive formation. The air had changed, thickened with something unseen. A test. A hunt. The realization sent a slow, cold ripple down his spine. They were not the hunters here. The forest exhaled, and something moved. The forest watched in silence. High above the ground, concealed by dense foliage and the play of light and shadow, the hunters waited. They had seen the aliens land, seen their arrogance in the way they stomped through the undergrowth, their postures dripping with the certainty of superiority. The mistake was obvious. The invaders believed their technology made them untouchable. But machines could fail. Bodies could break. And arrogance? Arrogance could be turned into a weapon. Captain Elias Ward barely breathed as he lay along the thick branch of an ancient oak, his rifle braced against his shoulder. His camouflage suit, coated in a specialized mud mixture, blended seamlessly with the bark. The Arzak had no idea how out of their depth they were. Through the high-powered scope, he watched the aliens fan out, sweeping their weapons in precise military fashion. Their discipline was evident, but it was brittle. They were used to fighting enemies who met them on open ground, who flinched at their strength, who panicked when confronted head-on. That would not happen here. He tapped twice on the comms band around his wrist. A silent signal. Movement to the west. Sergeant Valdez was already in position, perched even higher in the trees. She shifted slightly, just enough to adjust her bow. A firearm might give away too much, but an arrow, especially one tipped with a toxin that numbed muscle function, could do its work without alerting the others. A perfect test. Below, the aliens were growing agitated. Their scanning devices flickered, distorted by the passive jamming field the humans had activated minutes ago. Nothing drastic, just enough to make them question their readings. One of the Arzak, slightly apart from the others, turned in a slow circle, weapon raised. His mandibles flared, and the tension in his body was visible. He knew something was wrong. Ward marked him. A breath, a heartbeat, then the whisper of a bowstring. The arrow struck the alien just below the armored plate at his neck. He jerked, stumbling, his limbs suddenly uncooperative. His rifle slipped from his grasp, sinking into the loam below. For 3 seconds he remained upright, mandibles twitching, before his legs gave out entirely. He crumpled, unmoving but alive. The others reacted instantly. Weapons swung in all directions, scanning, searching. One dropped to check on the fallen soldier, growling something in their guttural language. Another flipped through different vision modes, desperate to find a target. Ward did not move. None of them did. The alien checking the downed soldier barked something, frustrated. He yanked the arrow free and examined it. Then, as if realizing how exposed they were, he snarled and motioned for the others to form a tighter perimeter. Good. They were learning. The squad's leader, the one with a heavier build and more elaborate armor, took a cautious step forward. His posture had shifted. Not quite fear, not yet, but something close to wariness. They had expected a passive environment, one they could move through unchallenged. Another miscalculation. Valdez didn't take a second shot. That wasn't the point. The humans weren't here to rush into an engagement. They were here to control the battlefield, to unsettle, to instill doubt. A new sound filtered through the trees. Subtle, a rustling that could have been wind. Then a distant whisper just at the edge of hearing. A voice or a trick. The AR-Zoc turned sharply toward the sound. Their scanners showed nothing, but their instincts were beginning to scream. The first crack in their composure. Ward felt the shift as keenly as if it had been spoken aloud. They had encountered nothing, yet already their movements had become stiffer, their reactions sharper. Their leader issued orders in a clipped tone, a change in strategy. They were going to move. Ward tapped his comm again. The hunters repositioned. Bralven's mandibles clicked in frustration. He had fought on over a dozen worlds, crushed rebellions before they even began, broken warriors who thought they could outmaneuver the AR-Zoc. But this was something else. He turned to Zalvok. This is a waste of time. We should return to the ship and purge this forest with fire. Zalvok did not respond immediately. His eyes scanned the shadows, considering. Finally, he shook his head. No, this is not random. They are testing us. Bralven snarled. Then we should strike back. Strike where? Zalvok gestured around them. At shadows? At ghosts? We would waste our ammunition on empty air. Another flicker of movement. A whisper, closer this time. It was not human speech. Not exactly. It was something else. A recording, distorted just enough to be eerie. The realization made Bralven's skin crawl. They are playing with us, one of the others muttered. Zalvok exhaled through his nostrils. He was beginning to see it now. The humans were not engaging in battle. They were hunting, slowly, carefully, using patience as a weapon. His claws flexed. Enough, he said. We will. A sound cracked through the trees. Not a whisper this time. Not a trick. Something falling. A body. One of their own. Ward watched through his scope as the second alien was yanked upward, disappearing into the canopy without so much as a scream. He was just gone. The remaining aliens recoiled, weapons snapping up too late. They had no target, no enemy to strike back at. Now they understood. The forest had swallowed them whole. The AR-Zoc tightened their formation, their weapons trained on the shifting canopy above. The soldier who had been taken did not scream. There had been no struggle, no sound of impact, just a body vanishing into the gloom. That, more than anything, sent unease rippling through the squad. Warriors as they were, they had never fought an enemy they could not see. Bralven's claws twitched around the grip of his rifle. His scanning visor flickered with static, failing to render a clear thermal readout. It was as if the jungle itself was absorbing their technology, nullifying their advantage. Frustration warred with something darker in his chest. This was not how battles were fought. This was not how enemies were supposed to behave. Zalvok steadied himself, gripping his pulse rifle tighter. Enough of this, he growled. They want to frighten us. Do not let them. A branch creaked. A whisper of movement. One of the scouts pivoted too late. A loop of woven fiber, nearly invisible in the dim light, tightened around his ankle. He was ripped from the ground with brutal speed, vanishing into the treetops as his startled cry was cut short. His weapon clattered onto the damp earth. The rest of the squad erupted into action, firing wildly into the foliage above. Pulses of searing blue light sliced through leaves and branches, illuminating the canopy in erratic bursts. The scent of scorchwood filled the air, but there was no sign of the missing soldier. Only silence. Zalvok clenched his jaw. This was no ordinary enemy. This was precision, calculation, a force that did not fight with brute strength, but with something far more dangerous, patience. Regroup, he barked, stepping over the fallen rifle of his vanished soldier. We move. The ground beneath him collapsed. A pit, concealed beneath layers of loose dirt and foliage, swallowed him whole. He landed hard, his armor absorbing most of the impact. But the moment he tried to rise, something snapped close around his wrist. A restraint, a trap, from above. Bralven barely had time to process what had happened before the ambush escalated. A deafening explosion sent a shockwave through the trees as a crude but effective tripwire detonation triggered to their left. Two soldiers were thrown backward, their armor scorched, their weapons tumbling from their grips. Something moved through the underbrush, silent, quick. Shadows flickered between the trees, their one moment, gone the next. Bralven snarled and fired into the darkness, but his shot struck nothing. The jungle was a living thing, shifting and closing around them, swallowing them in its grasp. A strangled gurgle snapped his attention to his right. One of his warriors stood rigid, clawed fingers twitching at his throat. A blade, small, precise, had slipped between the gaps in his armor, severing something vital. He dropped to his knees and toppled forward without a sound. Bralven's mandibles flared. "Cowards!" he roared into the trees. "Face us!" No response, only the slow rustling of unseen movement. The game was not yet finished. Zalvok struggled in the pit, wrenching at the restraint around his wrist. The moment he managed to snap the fibers, another figure dropped down into the hole with him. A human, dressed in a ghillie suit, his form barely distinguishable from the environment. The soldier moved like a shadow, knife in hand, posture coiled and ready. Zalvok lunged. The human sidestepped effortlessly, bringing the blade in a clean arc across the Arzok's side. It didn't penetrate the armor, but it didn't need to. The movement had been deliberate, controlled. A test. Zalvok struck again, but the human was already gone, vaulting out of the pit with the grace of something born in this environment. Bralven saw his commander reemerge, panting, his stance lower than before. Wariness had replaced arrogance. "They are testing us," Zalvok muttered. Bralven growled. "Then we should." A gunshot cracked through the jungle. A single, clean shot. The soldier next to Bralven dropped instantly, a perfect hole punch through the weak point beneath his jaw. He was dead before he hit the ground. For the first time, Bralven felt something he could not suppress. Doubt. The jungle had never been empty. The enemy had been with them the entire time. Watching, waiting. The Arzok were not fighting soldiers. They were being hunted. Bralven's grip tightened around his rifle as the jungle pressed in. He had never felt this before. This gnawing sensation that the battlefield was not his to control. The Arzok were conquerors, bred for war. Yet here they were, staggering beneath the weight of an enemy they had yet to even see. This was not war. This was slaughter in slow motion. Zalvok rose from the pit, his movements sharper, more deliberate. The arrogance that had once laced his posture was gone. He had underestimated them. These humans who fought like ghosts, who struck without mercy and vanished before the mind could process the attack. The battle doctrine of the Arzok was clear. Overpower the enemy, press the assault, break their will. But what did you do when the enemy refused to be seen? Another rustling in the trees. No shots, no direct attack, just sound. Just enough to keep the squad on edge. "We take the high ground," Zalvok said suddenly, his voice low, clipped. "Now?" Bralven hesitated. "They control the canopy. Then we take it from them." It was a gamble, but hesitation was death. The humans had maneuvered them into a killing field, where every tree concealed a hidden weapon. Every shadow harbored an unseen threat. If they remained here, they would die one by one, picked apart like prey. They needed to change the battlefield. The remaining Arzok moved quickly, launching grappling lines to the thick branches above. Their ascent was swift, armor thrumming as servos adjusted for the climb. The forest blurred past them, the tangled undergrowth falling away beneath their feet. The first soldier to crest the treetops never made it. A thin wire, almost invisible in the shifting light, caught around his throat mid-ascent. His momentum carried him forward, and the line snapped tight. The wet crack of vertebrae shattering echoed through the trees as his body jerked once, then hung limp. His weapon, still clutched in lifeless hands, dangled uselessly at his side. The others hesitated for half a breath too long. Gunfire erupted from the canopy. Not a wild barrage, not a desperate attack, precise, controlled bursts. Every shot found a target, striking exposed joints, slipping between armor plates. The first two AR-Zoc fell before they even had a chance to fire back, their bodies dropping through the branches like broken dolls. Bralven threw himself sideways, barely avoiding a shot that would have punched through his throat. His rifle snapped up, returning fire, but there was nothing to hit. Just empty branches, just shadows. Then the humans were moving. A shape blurred past him, dropping from the upper branches with terrifying speed. A figure landed atop one of the remaining AR-Zoc, knife flashing, the impact driving both bodies from the branch and into the depths below. Zalvok fired 3 times, tracking movement, but his shots hit only wood and air. The humans were too fast, too practiced in this environment. This was their battlefield, their hunting ground, and the AR-Zoc were intruding. Bralven turned, his rifle sweeping. A blade pressed against his throat. The human was behind him, as if he had materialized from the very air. Bralven tensed, every muscle coiled, but he did not move. The knife had found the unarmored joint between his helmet and his chest plate. A single twitch would open his throat. For the first time in his life, he was powerless. Zalvok saw it too. He froze, his own weapon still raised, but there was no clear shot. More figures emerged from the trees, stepping into view, their weapons steady. There were only 4 AR-Zoc left now. They were surrounded. A voice, smooth and steady, broke the silence. "You thought we were prey." The human behind Bralven pressed a knife, just enough to draw a thin line of dark blood. A warning, a promise. "But you walked into our jungle," the voice continued. "And now it belongs to you just as much as you're dead." Zalvok's mandibles tightened, his rifle lowered by an inch, but no further. He had lost battles before, but he had never been outmatched like this. The humans had dismantled them, not through brute force, but through patience, precision. "You can surrender," the voice said. Bralven stiffened, waiting for Zalvok's answer. He knew what it would be. A long silence. Then Zalvok exhaled slowly. Never. The jungle exhaled with him. And then the killing began again. The moment Zalvok spoke, the knife at Bralven's throat disappeared. Not because the human had relented, because the killing had resumed. Bralven moved on instinct, diving to the side just as a shot cracked through the canopy. The air where he had stood moments ago rippled with the force of the projectile, bark splintering from a nearby branch. He rolled, bringing his rifle up, but he had no clear target. The humans had already melted back into the jungle. Zalvok fired wildly, not expecting to hit anything, but needing the sound of his weapon to drown out the encroaching silence. The AR-Zoc had never known fear in battle. But now, as the jungle seemed to close in around them, something primal stirred in his chest. The humans had not been fighting to defend territory. They had been hunting. A strangled cry cut through the treetops. Another AR-Zoc was gone. Bralven barely caught a blur of movement as something, or someone, yanked the soldier off the branch and into the void below. No impact, no scream. Just absence. Zalvok knew the numbers were against them. The AR-Zoc had begun this operation with a full scout team, confident in their superiority. Now, only 3 remained. The silence stretched. A voice, smooth and almost amused, slithered through the trees. "You still think you can win?" Bralven turned sharply, searching for the source. Nothing. Just leaves, just shadows, just the endless, watching jungle. Zalvok straightened, mandibles twitching in defiance. "You delay the inevitable." The human laughed softly. "You're not inevitable. You're just another hunt." A metallic snap echoed through the canopy. Bralven barely had time to react before the branch beneath one of the remaining Arzok gave way. A carefully severed vine, a precisely weakened point. Sabotage executed before the fight had even begun. The soldier tumbled, clawing at the air, before vanishing into the abyss of the jungle below. Bralven and Zalvok were alone. This was not war. This was execution. Zalvok's breathing was steady, but his claws flexed around his rifle. Bralven could see it now. His commander understood. The battle was lost. Not because they lacked strength or firepower, but because the humans had fought them in a way they could not counter. Every mistake, every miscalculation had been exploited with ruthless precision. This planet did not belong to the Arzok. It never had. A shimmer in the branches. The last warning. Zalvok turned to fire. Too late. A single bullet tore through his chest, punching through the weak point between his armor plates. He stumbled, his rifle slipping from his grasp, his mandibles twitching in silent fury. He fell to one knee, his breath rattling. Bralven didn't move. He didn't cry out. There was nothing to say. Zalvok exhaled once, shuddered and collapsed. Silence. Bralven remained still, his rifle gripped in trembling hands. His mind raced. He had always believed the Arzok to be the greatest hunters in the galaxy, their tactics unmatched. Yet now he knelt, the last survivor of a team that had been dismantled piece by piece. A shape descended from the canopy, landing softly in front of him. A human, masked, rifle slung across his back, eyes sharp and calculating. He moved without fear, without hesitation. This was his world. Bralven stared up at him. He knew what was coming, but the human didn't raise his weapon. He simply crouched, tilting his head. "You understand now," he said. Bralven's mandibles twitched, but he said nothing. There was no use in denying it. The human's voice was calm, almost patient. "We don't fight wars your way. We never have." He gestured to the jungle around them. "You thought you could march in and take what you wanted. But here, strength isn't enough. Here, the strongest thing is the one that knows how to wait." Bralven inhaled shakily. He was not afraid of death, but this was something worse. He had not been outgunned. He had been outmatched. The human stood. "Go back to your people. Tell them what happened here." Bralven's claws tightened around his weapon. A part of him wanted to lash out, to take one final futile shot. But he didn't. He knew what would happen if he tried. Instead, he forced himself to his feet, feeling the weight of failure press against his chest. He turned, stepping carefully to the edge of the branch. He did not look back. The jungle watched as he left.